We're fortunate to have three very experienced beach college coaches on our panel today. Russell Brock enters his first season as head coach of the LSU beach volleyball team after spending the past 3 years as associate head coach under Fran Flory. LSU opened last season at number 19 during the preseason, marking the first time in school history LSU has been ranked. Prior to his stint at LSU, Brock spent 8 seasons with the indoor volleyball program at Rice University.
Beth Van Fleet is in her 7th season as the head coach of the Georgia State beach volleyball program. In 2016, she was named the CCSA Coach of the Year after the Panthers earned a program high 26 wins, and she led the team to a number 7 national ranking and a bid to the NCAA tournament. Her 103 career wins ranks first among all active CCSA coaches. Van Fleet spent 8 seasons with the AVP, competing in over 80 professional sand tournaments and representing the United States abroad.
And RJ Bella enters his 6th season as assistant coach and recruiting coordinator for the University of South Carolina beach program. The Gamecocks set the program record with 24 wins in 2018 and earned the number 6 overall seed in the NCAA tournament. RJ has been named to the AVCA Coaches the AVCA 30 under 30 list. He's a former indoor assistant coach for South Carolina and Wichita State, as well as Newman University, where he was captain for the men's volleyball team. We're going to address what junior clubs are doing well. And Beth, why don't you go ahead and lead this one off?
Excellent. So I think these bullet points are very clear. Certainly, clubs and organizations have taken a role in starting to develop the whole athlete with regard to strength and conditioning, mental training, some sort of flexibility training. A lot of organizations use yoga as well as skills training. One of the things that I think we're all seeing a lot of is very versatile players, athletes who can come in playing the left side or the right side. They might be 6 feet tall and they know how to be a full-time defender. They might be 5'5" and they know how to block. And so it's really nice that clubs are not training someone to have a specific skill set, and most athletes are very well-rounded as they're entering the college ranks. A couple of other things that we have noticed is just that the athletes are showing up into the college space with such passion and love for the game, and that is largely attributed to what the club organizations and directors are doing with regard to helping the athletes enjoy the process of learning and growing within their skill set. RJ, I think you had a couple of these if you want to talk about some of them.
Yeah, I think to add on what you said to developing the passion of the game, I think it's so great that following all these clubs on social media, how they not only recognize their athletes for their beach accomplishments, but even on the indoor side, they follow them. And even so, maybe that attracts newer athletes to the club and then they fall in love with it. I think it's just great that they're bringing in like maybe professionals or like these players' favorite players to practices and getting to meet them or watch some of their practices. So I think it's so awesome that the clubs and club directors and coaches are helping grow the sport through just genuine passion and love. And kind of the cool thing to go with that as well is that there are a lot of clubs that are letting girls talk to other players of other clubs. You know, it's kind of with indoor volleyball, sometimes it's kind of you're confined to your only club, but I think it's a good social skill as well to talk to kind of a stranger. And it's cool seeing clubs encourage that with their players and be social and get to meet other people as well. And lastly, looking at that last point, getting other people's ways to do things or training methods or terminology. It's really awesome that these clubs and coaches are starting to bring not just other players and pros, but also collegiate coaches or maybe high school coaches into their program. So that way everything's not one dimensional. These players will have lots of tools in their tool belt when it comes to playing and bettering their game.
Yeah, the only other thing I think that really comes to mind is we've started seeing more clubs actually doing club versus club format, which models the college game. And I think that that's a huge development for us as college coaches to see that happening at the junior level, because honestly, that's one of the big challenges with making the transition to the college game is you kind of lost that team atmosphere. So to be able to have that, start seeing that, and even developing value kind of in your lower pairs, so to speak, that's something that is great for us to see. We're super excited about it and glad that that's growing at the juniors level as well.
Awesome. And, we've got some ways that clubs can improve their development and training of the elite beach athletes, and start off with the mental game. training the athletes from the mental standpoint. Beth, how do you feel clubs can improve in this area?
I think there's a lot of growth for all athletes across the board with regard to mental training. So it's not just at the club level. I think it's something that as college coaches, we need to continue to work on that as well. What we've seen, I think in the college space is 5 years ago, if you had a good cut shot and a good high line, your skills were enough to help you be successful in a game. And what we're seeing now is everybody has a good cut shot and a good high line. And so very much the difference between someone who's able to perform under pressure or without pressure is someone who has a mental toolbox as well. So a lot of clubs have done kind of what Russell was referencing earlier. A lot of clubs have changed the practice format or their competition format to create pressure situations, which is very vital for these young athletes to develop their mental toolbox. One of the things I think is essential for young athletes is looking at their self-talk. And it's very hard as a coach to hear what someone's saying in their head, but oftentimes their body language can reflect how they're responding to a failure or to an error. So I've listened a lot to some of the podcasts and interviews that Brene Brown has talked about with perfectionism. I think there's a lot of perfectionists who are attracted to beach volleyball because it is a game of errors, so it will ultimately disappoint a perfectionist. But she does a lot of reforming or redefining what perfectionism is and trying to help athletes or just people in general have this idea of striving towards excellence. So I think there's a lot of really neat information that she has put out onto the internet that we've used a lot just to learn in that capacity. And a lot of that is just self-talk. So working with the athletes, like stopping plays and asking them, what are you thinking? What are you seeing? What are you feeling right now? I think that can be really beneficial in helping them form healthy habits at a young age so that that just becomes a strength for them and not a hurdle that they have to get over later on in their careers. I don't know if I brushed through some of those early points. Russell or RJ, did you guys want to talk a little bit more about them?
I could talk about, I'm kind of with Russell and talking about more club versus club format. I think it's a lot different with a club versus club format because the unique thing is that you and your partner can lose your match, but the team can still win the overall competition. Which unfortunately, when these juniors tournaments, sometimes it's uno, dos, adios, and you're done with the tournament, and you're just there's no win at the end of it. But I think with the club versus club format, not only is each pair contributing towards a team win, but also you kind of get in some unique situations. Kind of if the duel is tied 2-2 and it comes down to you and your partner, then all of a sudden everyone's gathering around your court. I don't think a lot of juniors get that experience. So I think it would be great with more of this club versus club format. It kind of helps prepare these juniors players for what some of the unique pressure situations for the collegiate scene are.
Yeah, I think that you can't emphasize enough just the mentality, the challenges from the mental game that are a part of our game. It's funny because I think we train, the way our sport works, we train all fall. And a lot of times we get these young players that come in and they're great, but we really don't see them in the heat of the battle until we get to the spring. And until you get to that point, you don't really know how they're going to respond. So, as much work as we can do in the fall, as much opportunities we can put them in to kind of model or mimic that type of pressure, it can give us an idea, but ultimately you don't know what you're getting until you actually put a jersey on, you play against somebody in a different jersey across the net. So the more that they do that in that team environment before they get to us, I think the more prepared that they're going to be to thrive in that particular scenario.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Let's move on to technical training. RJ, can you share your advice on the importance of technical training, how it can make a huge difference when developing an elite athlete for the college game?
Yeah, so I think something that us coaches talk a lot about is how we train a lot more than we actually compete. And it's kind of funny because in the juniors world, especially kind of like in the month of July, when a lot of the tournaments are going on, we hear stories of athletes playing in 4 tournaments within 7 days. And even on the collegiate level, that is not realistic. I think, we as coaches, we freak out when our girls have to play 3 competitions in one day. So I think one of the culture shock things for junior players when they get to college is, wow, just drilling for a long time, for months and months. And occasionally we'll play here and there. And sometimes they they don't understand, or maybe it's not as fun. But then the spring rolls around, it's competition season and everything's good. So I think if coaches on the junior side can talk a little more about the technical training, drilling, yes, you can have competition and game-like drills, but there's far more training at the collegiate level than actual play. And I think there's a lot of great systems teaching, talking about maybe we want to pass forward and keep it up and down and things like that. But sometimes you skip over the fine details of the technique, like thumbs next to each other when you're passing and rolling your forearms or knees over your toes and shoulders. Things like that kind of just get skipped upon and we automatically go straight into the systems. So if we can kind of do more of a focus or find out how different ways to teach maybe what your body should look like when you're performing a skill or breaking down an arm swing and helping your athletes with that, not just for efficiency, but for health reasons as well.
Absolutely. And I think it's hard to kind of unravel where one of these issues begins and another one ends, because I think this part of it absolutely is kind of intertwined with the mentality. Like, the reason why we want them to get more technical training is because when we get them, or at the college level, they're going to be in that scenario. And if mentally that's too challenging for them to stay focused over the course of a 3 or 4 hour practice for as much time as we want to train them, if they can't handle that mentally, then we're not going to be able to technically get the progress out of them that they're going to need to be as successful as they would hope to be and we would hope for them to be. So for sure, the more, I guess, comfortable they are in a situation with technical training, not just getting out there and rolling the balls out and say, hey, get after it. I think that the more prepared they're going to be to thrive in the college scenario, because that's what we have to do. We have months on end where we just aren't allowed to compete. So all we can do is really train, and that's what they need. And I think everybody always compares indoor to beach. And I think one of the things that indoor does really well that we need to progress more to the beach side is reps. I mean, if you're a primary passer indoor, you're going to get thousands of reps in a course of a week. And passing is honestly probably even more important in our game, and there's way more variables, but yet we don't do that in the beach game nearly as much as we should. Consequently, that's why indoor players ball control, even when they come, and I know we'll talk about it at some point, but when they transition to the sand, that's one of the things we can almost always rely on, is that their first touch is going to be great. They can manipulate their platform, but that's not by accident. It's because they've had tons of technical training, tons of reps, and that's what will allow our beach players at all levels to gain more efficient training in all these different skills that they have to be proficient at.
I think I'll just add, we are at the collegiate level kind of, I guess, supporting the giving in and loving the process of learning and growth. At the collegiate level, we are able to compete 16 days each season. So if you have a freshman come in and start and play her entire career, she's going to play 64 times, excluding off season and postseason. So if you think about athletes that go to California and play for 30 days in July in tournaments, that's literally half of the games that they'll play in an entire college career. So I think that's, to me, like looking at those numbers explains why we put so much emphasis on appreciating the process of learning and growth and really being detail oriented with those fundamentals, because that's going to maximize our success and our ability to contribute to the outcome that we want when we're competing for those 16 days each season.
And I think even to compound what Beth said, it's not like the day, even if you compare those 30 days, like RJ said, the most we would ever play would be 3, and we'd like kind of be stressing if we're playing 3. The least a junior would play on one of those 30 days would be 4 or 5 minimum. So like you could really compound a whole college career into one summer of play, which I know we're going to talk about recovery and physical, all of that stuff. So I think that is just another way to kind of understand massive difference between the college game and the juniors game.
Yeah, and let's move on to the next slide. And Russell, go ahead and take this next slide on strength, physical strength, recovery, and nutrition.
Yeah, it's a huge part of our game, and I think it's one that we've had conversations and we've talked about kind of how it's implemented at the juniors level, and part of it's hard. I mean, a lot of these programs train at the beach. Okay, well, there's not usually a gym at the beach, so you have to be real creative on how you kind of get into this, and really the mindset, and I'll try and stick to the points that we've talked about before, but the whole training to get stronger and faster versus training to stay healthy. And ultimately, the big picture, we want those gains to be able to help us perform at a higher level, but it has to be for us to stay healthy. Like, that's the ultimate goal, is for us to be able to play this game as long as possible at the highest level possible, which does include getting stronger and jumping higher and moving faster, but that can't be at the expense of staying healthy. So that's got to be our primary goal. As far as personal trainers being necessary, I think it's more important that whoever is kind of implementing the programs, that they're qualified, because it's not something, as far as staying healthy, it's not something that you just kind of want to wing it. And there's a lot of people who are out there kind of learning on their own or fly as they go. And I think that there's a danger in that. So I think the personal trainers aren't necessary, but to have someone who's qualified and maybe even certified who can lead this process is really, really important. Because once again, the worst thing in the world is to go to a weight room to get healthy and get stronger and better, and to get injured and to lose your opportunity to train and compete. Recovery is another huge part of our process. I know we're going to talk again later about the time demands of the college athlete. And one of the things that we all implement is recovery. And we have great training staffs and training rooms where we have the ability to really properly recover and to prepare ourselves to train for the next day. It can be detrimental to have great training sessions, not recover properly, and show up the next day and try and train again. It can actually be harmful as opposed to continue to try and get better. So just having a mindset that we're not only going to notice it, but we're going to commit to ways that we can recover. And there's all kinds of things you can do without training rooms. They have great massage and rolling out and using balls and using bands and using partners. There's all kinds of stuff that's out there that can help the process of recovery. Ice is always your friend as well. So that's something that can be readily available. Nutrition is, we could have 17 webinars on nutrition, and I think it's a very hot topic and it's really important. But fueling for an athlete is different than fueling for a regular person. And so a lot of us have nutritionists that are on staff that can help with that process. And I think we're responsible as coaches to kind of be aware and watch that as well. And at the juniors level, again, it's not something that needs to be ignored. It has to be something that's a part of the education. And I think there's lots of resources that I know we'll talk about as well coming down the stretch, but there's lots of resources, and one that's even linked in right there that can be used to help benefit our athletes in not only growing and their ability, but also maintaining a proper level of health so that they can enjoy the game as long as possible.
Yeah, I would say, like, to add on to the recovery part, it is kind of unique where everyone trains at different spots, whether you're on the beach or you're at an indoor beach facility or you're actually outside on some park courts. Everyone's in a different situation, but there is one thing, and it's kind of becoming a hot topic in recovery, is quality of sleep. And that's something that everyone has access to. So I didn't even think of it till now, until Russell was talking about things we do have all control of, but sleep. And I don't know if our contact info will be available at the end, but I've been infatuated with reading about sleep because it's something I need to improve upon. But one thing that I like to believe when it comes to recovery, and it might be a controversial saying, but I don't think there's such a thing as overtraining, just under recovery. So for us at the collegiate level, are we training more than we play? Yes. But because we're training that much, we have to work that much harder for recovery so we can continue to train that hard. So that's just something I've always believed in, like that there's no such thing as overtraining, just under recovery.
Very powerful. The other thing that I would add is part of recovery is also the preparation. And I don't know if we're talking about that later, but in the event that we're not, I think having some sort of routine of warming up shoulders, warming up hips, warming up core, warming up spine before each and every practice is a really good habit to start building at the juniors level. Just because these athletes are going to be competing and training so often, that if they can get into the habit of having a pre-play routine where they are prepping their shoulders, prepping their hips, really getting ready to move in all different directions, that's certainly something that can only help them with longevity of their joint health and career.
One other thing I wanted to add, and this just came to me as well, our sport in lots of areas is an old school sport. Like it's happened forever. And I think in this particular area, training and nutrition, recovery, old school can be challenging. And I think we have to be willing to look into tons of research that's happening, tons of progress that's being made, and lots of really helpful things. And I think if we don't allow ourselves to really look into that, then we're relying on this old school mentality that probably isn't the best option moving forward at this point in time. So we have to get out of that old school mentality and embrace kind of the new knowledge that's out there that can help us be healthier in the long run.
Thank you, guys. Like Russell said, we can probably do a lot of webinars on just that topic alone, but we'll move forward to video analysis, and we don't want our audience to get the impression that we're talking all these apps and fancy software and programs. So RJ, why don't you kick this one off to talk about video?
So I think with as many competitions as juniors are playing, I think it's super important that they record themselves. And, obviously we're talking about the transition from a juniors player to college player. Well, you have to have the recruiting process. So having video of yourself to give to coaches is definitely an important aspect in recruiting. I don't think players should just take it just for recruiting purposes, but more so to watch themselves, see kind of what they're doing. I think it would be great if coaches can help educate their players. Now, it's different from program to program if you want to have video sessions, but with clubs, I mean, you have very few coaches coaching hundreds of athletes for some of those clubs. There's no way they can sit down and have a one-on-one video session with everyone. So I think it would be great if club coaches and high school coaches can, maybe educate these players what to watch for. Maybe it could be, here's something I want you to focus on that last match when you watch it back home. Maybe it's about a posture or a timing or a spacing issue. And just give them one thing to look at. Maybe it's their approach, or what does their arm look like when they're jumping in the air, and arm swing mechanics. If you can have these players almost take ownership of their own development by watching themselves play, that's going to help them get better for the collegiate level. I mean, collegiately, videos it's all over the place, but I think we're all trying to figure out a system and find a way where we can help our athletes get better through video evaluation. And, we're limited to the number of hours we can actually have with our athletes. So if we can have a way for them to watch video and they critique themselves and they find some focuses, it'll definitely help them in the long run. And then on top of it, you with YouTube and streaming, and these juniors players can find a lot of collegiate beach volleyball to their disposal. There are matches you can easily just YouTube at any one of our schools, and you can see a video of us playing there. I think these collegiate programs are doing an awesome job now of finding ways. Let's stream this, whether it be on our social media sites, whether it be on our school webpage. But I think that's a great opportunity for these juniors players to learn. And, at the end of the day, also kind of help them identify, what school maybe can I play at. I think video is great, not just for recruiting, but overall self-development. If our coaches can educate the players how to watch and what to watch when it comes to video sessions.
So I absolutely agree with everything that RJ is saying. I know we don't have like a lot of fancy apps and things. I often will just use my cell phone in slow motion if I'm working with an athlete and she's not understanding what we're asking of her, or she's not able to feel what she's doing. Oftentimes we'll just pull out a cell phone, film it in slow motion for 3 or 4 reps, and then let her watch it, ask for her critiques. And generally, I think that's something that somebody's going to have a phone out at a practice. It's pretty accessible, and it can be a very, very powerful tool just to let the athlete be able to see immediately in real time what she's doing and help her to make any adaptation to the skill that you're working on.
Yeah, and I think understanding learning styles, it's inevitable when you get these big groups of, young juniors players, that some of them are going to be visual learners. And I was that way in college. If I didn't see it, I was going to have trouble actually making adjustments. So to not, once again, we've talked about tool belts and all these tools we have. As 20 years ago, you couldn't have a cell phone at a beach practice. Like, it wasn't going to do anything that you needed to do as far as film. Now you do. Like, let's use that, because there's going to be players out there that will benefit greatly from the ability to watch themselves they can see it and they can hear it, but they need to see themselves before they can actually make those changes. And so to give the most people the opportunity to make the biggest adjustments, I think it's just another tool that we as coaches have to be willing to, once again, step out of that old school and meet these kids where they are to give them the opportunity to grow in the game.
Great. And the fifth element to taking that beach player to the elite level that we're going to address today is understanding schedules and time management. So Russell, can you start this one off?
Sure. Everything that we do at the college level is regulated by the NCAA. So to understand how that happens, I think we could do several webinars on it as well. But just to kind of give a brief overview, we all have exactly the same rules when it comes to practice. And for the most part, whenever we train, whatever we're allowed to do, we try and get close to that limits. So how that could generally look, there are two segments of training during our season. One is when you're out of season, and one is when you're in season. And the in season is actually a block of days that extends from a certain time during the fall and then basically all of spring. During that time, you can train for 20 hours a day. I'm sorry, that would be inaccurate. You could train for 20 hours a week. 20 hours a day would be challenging to pass through NCAA legislation. So 20 hours a week, which basically breaks down to 5 hours a day for 4 days, or you could kind of segment it how you want. And within those limitations, there are some smaller limitations that deal with training, that actually deal with meeting times with film, and anytime you would get the players together in a mandatory fashion, and then actual technique training that is practiced in the sand. But the bottom line is, during that time, you're going to have roughly 4 hours a day for 5 days a week that would give you those 20 hours. And when you're out of season, you only get 8 hours, and that can once again be broken up into different, but it's still a minimum of a couple hours a day for 4 days a week ballpark. So particularly the greatest portion of our calendar year is within our 20 hours a week during the school session. So the demands, and that's only athletics. So you're still required to go to class, obviously, which can be a good chunk of the day depending upon how many classes you have scheduled. So let's just say, for a ballpark figure, you're in 3 hours of class in a particular day, and then you have a weight session that's going to be an hour or so, and you have a 3-hour practice. Well, now you're already at 7 hours of your waking that you're actually mandated to be somewhere and doing something. Now, that doesn't include studying. That usually doesn't include, if you choose to do things you should do, like a recovery session, or maybe going in for some rehab or prehab with a trainer. So you can see how very quickly a day can get pretty full of things that are all really valuable and important. And I think understanding that at the junior level, like, I know because I've heard it and because I have kids of my own that are of junior level age, they feel like their days are really tight and full. And sometimes they are, but more often than not, there's plenty of time for maybe a little Netflix or possibly some social media time that could last for a couple hours. And the reality is, when you get to the college level, there has to be a willingness to put some of that stuff that we want to do on the back burner to get done all the things we need to do. And that's a decision that's made with each athlete personally, whether or not they want to try and be the best they can be, or if they just kind of want to be there and have the experience. And so the more we can understand the rigors of a college commitment with these bullet points as the demands of what you have to do, how much training you have to do, really, and even rolling that into how little we get to compete, and then how we focus so much on the development of skills, whether it's within the game or whether it's the mentality. All of that is a big commitment. And that doesn't even begin to touch base on a lot of the programs do kind of work in their community, like they give back in their communities with community service or just being involved with other opportunities that come up. And those aren't even a lot of times mandated by the programs. It's just those by the coaching staffs. The players just they understand their role and their responsibility within the communities that their schools are. So that can be added into those time commitments as well. So I think once again, if you're looking at the big picture, it's all about understanding that it's a massive undertaking to do what we do at a college level in an excellent way, because it touches on so many different facets of life, but it's also incredibly valuable and an unbelievable experience if you commit to that in the full way that it should be committed to.
Pretty good. I mean, you really laid it out, what it's like to be a college beach athlete. Yeah, it's pretty time demanding. So we'll move on to the next slide here. And, this is becoming more and more common, indoor players transitioning to the beach. So Beth, how do you feel about it?
It's having the indoor players, especially the four-year indoor players that are transferring over as grad students, or having junior athletes who have played a whole bunch of indoor and then late in their career decide to start playing beach volleyball. I think the one trend that we all agree on is it really is learning a new sport. And so the athletes that are most successful in making the transition are the ones who are willing to commit to the growth and development, and they're willing to deal with the failure and the disappointment that they're going to feel. Because so often when they're coming to the beach from an indoor program, whether it's juniors or at the collegiate level, they've really been stars and they are very confident in their skill set indoors. And the games seem similar enough that moving from one surface to another, it shouldn't be that difference, when the reality is there are a couple of skills that are similar, but almost everything has some sort of tweak or adaptation for the sand. And I think that's very humbling for a lot of the athletes that try to make that transition. And so it's very hard to say when someone will actually have a breakthrough, when they kind of hit their stride, but it's not something that's overnight. There's not a secret. There's not a magic drill that teaches you everything about beach volleyball. It's truly, truly the process. And when we see athletes that are starting that transition later than other athletes, they often feel the pressure of trying to catch up with the group. And so it generally takes a pretty mature athlete to recognize that she's working on her own time, his or her own time, and that their development can only be so much each day. And so it's generally probably not something that people can pick up in a couple of months. It's probably more towards a year or so. But I think a lot of us at the collegiate level, our hope is when we have those athletes who transfer from indoor to beach, we hope that their beach career lasts much longer than college. And I feel like we share that with a lot of the juniors coaches, and that the juniors coaches are hoping that the beach careers for their athletes are lasting much further than their high school career. That, whether they're playing in college or whether they're just continuing to play the game for fun, because they have developed so much love and passion for the sport. Most all of us, I think, agree that we want the longevity of the sport for these athletes. It's generally going to weed out the athletes that aren't willing to fail over and over and over again, just because of the nature of the sport. There's no hiding, like everybody knows that. You can't sub anybody out. So it really allows us to be vulnerable in our skills and be honest in our assessment as we help the athletes grow through the transition. And then I think the last point on there with the increasing the graduate transfers into the beach programs, I think some juniors coaches feel like that's a little bit of a threat for the freshmen, like those grad students are taking spots that the freshmen could have access to. What I have seen, and I think what is more of the trend, is that grad students are usually used to complement a really small senior class. And so it's not like a lot of coaches are picking a grad student for 1 year over a freshman for 4 years. It's much more so maybe somebody transferred out of the program, or somebody along the way in that college program wasn't playing, stepped away from the game. And now there's a spot in the roster that they're generally looking for some sort of leadership or experience to step in. So I don't think that it's so much of a competition between a freshman and a grad student for a roster position. I think it's more of college coaches using grad students to fill in potentially a small class in their roster. I know that went a little bit off tangent, but that's certainly something that I have heard people discussing recently.
Yeah, I think everything Beth said is spot on. And I think that even just hearing it out loud, that process is much more of a mental process than it is a physical process. We know that a lot of times these indoor players that are transitioning are fantastic athletes with great skill sets, but the reality is they've got to make it through that hard time where they're not nearly as good as they used to be. And the reality is, if anybody tried to transition from one sport to another sport and catch up with elite athletes at the college level when they've really never done it before in their lives, it would be like impossible for anybody to think that they could be successful. But that's kind of their mentality when they come in. Oh, I'm just going to come in and do it. if they can't get past that, then it's really, really tough. But the ones that do it well are the ones that don't mind, honestly, looking foolish for a few months and really, really trying hard to be great. And then that eventually that breakthrough happens.
Yeah, I think it kind of adds on to what Russ said earlier in this presentation, but was talking about how kind of indoor has the culture of, it's almost like the race for reps. And so they're in a lot of these collegiate indoor players are used to train, which kind of what we were talking about earlier is that's kind of on the beach side, we train a lot more than we play. So I think there's those collegiate indoor players that make the transition over. Do they need to be humble and relearn this learning process and embrace mistakes and failures? And yes, but on top of it, they also kind of have an advantage where they've been in a culture where it's reps, a lot in practice, a lot beforehand, a lot afterwards, which ultimately that you kind of need that also in the beach game. And so I think they have that going for them if they were wanting to make that transition over to the beach.
Hey, that's good stuff. Thanks, guys. So let's move on to the next slide about the importance that the club coaches have and the directors have, a role to educate the parents and your coaches in the importance of their actions, especially if it has a direct reflection or impact on the athlete, which many times it does. So RJ, you lead this one off on what makes you crazy.
Well, I love the first one, which Beth notated, allowing their athletes to compete without sun protection. Honestly, if you think about it, that can go back to the strength conditioning, rest, recovery aspect of all of this. Sun protection, I mean, it's very interesting. And I think a lot of it is maybe it's newer beach people as well who aren't out in the sun as much, don't really understand how much damage the sun can be, not just to you health-wise, but also just zap you of energy. For instance, if there's juniors players playing, and I remember our very first year we had a bunch of new girls, and in between matches they're outside in the sun but dancing to the music when it's like, get under the shade, like stay out of the sun. So things like, and especially when you're out at the beach, it's kind of tough because you have to bring your own shade. So if you don't have shade, obviously sunscreen and long sleeves and cover-ups are great, but I think when parents don't necessarily prepare for themselves and their children, they need to step it up and really pay attention to the sun. Another thing is kind of when it comes to parents is stepping into, I want to say almost areas of conflict, whether it be scorekeeping and a point was distributed to the wrong side, or if there was a bad handset and no one called it. I think conflict is healthy. I think conflict is essential for growth. And for these young athletes, this is one of the few times where they're kind of in a controlled environment where they can debate, they can argue for what they believe is right, and the other side can do as well. So when a parent kind of comes in and tries to fix the solution, or a coach comes in and tries to fix the solution, well, now we're robbing these athletes of a great learning opportunity that's far more important than maybe 1 point, or if you doubled it, or if you hit the net. I think sometimes parents can forget that. They obviously want to win the match and make things look good on video for recruiting. But at the end of the day, it's about teaching lessons. And I think a little conflict like this can do wonders. And if you want to talk about preparing them for college, that's a great learning moment for them. So I think parents and coaches can kind of, unless there's some sort of personal harm or opportunity for personal harm, I think let the kids figure it out. That's kind of something they just need to figure it out and battle on their own and grow from it. And then that last bullet, I know they're not allowing players from other clubs to play with each other. I think in a way that limits their ability to practice networking skills. Walking up to a complete stranger that you might think would be a good partner for you. If they're in a different club, then I don't think we should handicap those girls from that opportunity to practice those social skills. So I think those are just some things that I think maybe hinder our junior athletes' growth, whether it be volleyball and health-wise, or from a personality and culture and mindset kind of sense.
Just the value, and it's a fine line because we all want to win, but at the junior level, at times it seems like there's such an importance placed on that 1 point or that one play, because it might, it seems that, well, if I don't win that 1 point, like I'm not going to get to play in college. Like that's a kind of a mentality that sometimes creeps in. It's like, honestly, and I don't mean to speak for them, but I would assume we're all in the same boat. Results at the junior level aren't that important. We see all kinds of resumes that are super deep with all kinds of accolades that really don't mean anything. So to emphasize winning to the point where you're injecting yourself into an arena that you don't need to be in it's just a waste of, honestly, time. And it kind of spins back around to one of the things that I know both of these coaches value highly is just the ethical side of the game and even morality. Like, we're looking at just teaching a game, we're teaching a lifestyle. And I think that's one of the great things about our sport is that you do have to make these decisions. You do have to enter in these conversations, and you do have to, you would hope that you'd be honest in these moments and to allow them to kind of work through that. That's that life lesson. That's that teaching moment that maybe afterwards, that's where the parent can come in and say, hey, this is what I saw and this is what happened. Like, I want to help you grow in this way. Or a club coach, rather than jumping in there and solving it, like, let them work it out. And then on the back end, come in and say, hey, that's not who we are, or hey, that is who we are, and I'm really proud of you for what you chose to do in that moment. Those are great opportunities to delve in and teach something outside of technique and all the physical fitness that we've talked about a lot.
The only thing I would add is we're asking all of this of parents, but we also recognize how hard it is, because when we are coaching our teams and there's a discussion, we definitely want to jump in and fix everything as well. So I think it's very hard to practice that consistently, but very much what Russell and RJ are saying, the more we can all practice that and allow the athletes to work through their conflict and to problem solve together, the better off they're going to be.
Awesome. Great stuff. Well, let's get to the questions, because we have a few good ones that have rolled in, and we want to remind everyone, if you do have a question, just submit it through the control panel to the right of your screen, and we'll try to get to as many questions as we can here in the next 5 minutes. But if we don't get to your question, we will include contact information for Russell, Beth, and RJ, so you can reach out to them personally or to us, and we can help you. And the first one we're going to ask, if Russell, you could talk to this one, what would be a typical training and recovery schedule you'd recommend for the junior program?
Wow. I think it goes back to, I think, really understanding what the strain and the stress you're putting on your body in a particular moment. So, like, we have different seasons through the course of the year where sometimes we're training more than others. I think generally, and that's the only way we can really talk about this as far as specifically at LSU, generally there are, maintenance routines and recovery routines where it's not a decision-making process like, do I need to do this week, or do I need to do this today? It's a part of what we do. It's a part of what an athlete at the college level does. It should be a part of what a juniors athlete does as well. Like Beth was saying, to have that warm-up routine where we're going through specific things, everything, no matter what. If we feel great or we don't feel great, we're training our bodies to prepare to compete or to prepare to train in a certain way. Same thing could be said for afterwards. Afterwards, we're cooling down, we're recovering, and there's all different ways to recover. But it's not like if we do it, it's how we do it. It's a commitment to actually doing it. Same thing with the training, like to set up a great training regimen if you're in season or you're out of season, to be able to tailor it to kind of complement how much you're actually in the sand training. Like, some places it's really cold and you don't have access to an indoor facility to get in the sand. Well, maybe that's the time where you really hit the weight room hard, and you wouldn't want to do that at the heat of your competition where you're in the sand every day for 3 or 4 hours, really getting after it from the technical training side of things. Now you need to really revamp your strength conditioning side, because that'll compromise your ability to, 1, perform at your best level, and 2, to recover in a way that you would need to recover. So without getting into specifics, I think routine is the biggest positive thing that you can add to your training regimen, and try and get as educated as possible in those different areas so that you're not compromising your ability to.
All right, Beth, how would you recommend teaching setting to a player that's transitioned from indoor? Do you have
Is it
any
specific about hand setting or platform setting?
hand setting?
Hand setting. So I think it's very interesting. The beach game has started moving more towards the pace of an indoor set. In the past, like going back to the old school idea, you used to see a lot of deep dish setting in the sand, but now hands are being called much faster. So I think a lot of the hand setting cues that are used in a lot of indoor programs probably transfer pretty well to the sand, with the one, I think, the biggest thing is there's no deception in the sand, is that as a setter, there's only one person that you can set or you can option. So I think just a lot of the cues probably transfer very well from indoor to beach with regard to hand setting. But a lot of it, again, is just going to come back to patience, because the ball feels a little bit different. It might be shaped a little bit different. It might be a little less inflated. So a lot of it is going to go, especially for hand setting, just getting a lot of reps in a lot of different scenarios.
Last question, just in terms of running a juniors tournament, how would you start off the day speaking to the group about how to handle those controversial calls on the hand set? Like how to.
So talking about, is this adding on to hand setting or just?
The same person runs tournaments. How should they approach talking to the group about those situations if they're running a tournament? I guess from your personal, opinion.
It's been pretty cool where there have been some tournaments I've gone to where there is a pre-tournament meeting where it's not just for the athletes, but they gather all the parents in there as well. And they do a lot of these tournaments have like a head official for a big tournament, and the head official kind of talks about it to everyone and saying, the athletes are there on the court and they're very strict about coaching on the sidelines, but making sure that everyone is on the same page. And I think it's important you not only tell them what you expect, where I don't expect parents or non-credentialed coaches to ever have a part in this match, but they also explain why. So like when we were talking about, it's such a great learning opportunity for these athletes to maybe debate over something that went on in the match, whether it be the score or a rules violation. It's important that they have to experience that. And so I think with these tournament directors, when they have this meeting or they're telling people, parents and non-credentialed coaches, please let them handle it. I think it's important you explain why, and not so much that you just want to do it because you're the tournament director, but there's actually value in that action.
All right.
I think one of the things that we have seen, so I'll go really fast. One of the things that we saw at a lot of our fall exhibitions this year was playing through and then having the discussion afterwards. So I think that if that is our goal, if growth and development is our goal at the juniors level, to play through an entire rally, and then once the rally is finished, then have the conversation about if something was a lift or if somebody was in the net. It's hard to do if you're not used to playing like that, but I think that was something we saw the college athletes this fall make a transition to, and I do think we got very valuable reps out of that because we weren't stopping at the point of error. We're playing through and then discussing it afterwards. We also did not have refs on those courts. I should preface it with that.
Thank you.